this was a tremendous amount of executive action. I think this was the most active a president has been on Inauguration Day, at least in modern American history. And if not modern American history, Donald Trump was the most active president of this millennium. He left no area of legislation untouched. He's going after immigrants, he's going after trans people, he's going after non-discrimination laws which just came across my feed right before I hopped on here. He's talking about economic moves. He's just so hell bent on doing everything he can to transform this country for the worst. Not even that, he repealed 75 of Joe Biden's executive orders, one of which being the Lowering Prescription Drugs Act, or I forget whatever the name is, but it capped the cost of prescription drugs for people on Medicare, namely senior citizens. So that's great. But we're going to go ahead and start off with Donald Trump scrapping Executive Order 11246, which prevents discrimination in hiring federal contractors. This law was signed by the second best LBJ of all time, Lyndon B. Johnson, in 1965. This is a this is directly out of the Civil Rights Act. The end of segregation, or the quote unquote the end of segregation, quote unquote the end of discrimination. But Donald Trump doesn't want that. He wants to be able to be racist, to be sexist. He wants Elon Musk and all the other goons in his administration to be as racist as possible. So this is courtesy of Malcolm Ferguson for Yahoo News. Trump quietly scraps non-discrimination rule while no one is looking. Trump is so intent on winning the DEI culture war that he's now killing bedrock programs from the segregation era. The president on Tuesday revoked EO 11246, which was signed into law in 1965 by Lyndon B. Johnson, and installed anti discriminatory practices into U.S. federal government contracting. The law prohibited federal contractors who, quote, do over $10,000 in government business from discriminating in employment decisions on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or natural origin. These are the same discrimination laws that apply to everybody, to not even government jobs anymore, but anyone who is a private sector employee, people who are um, public sector employees as well. Various states have amended their constitutions to codify this into to make this unrepealable in a legislative session. New York State just did that. They expanded constitutional protections because when you put something into law, at least non constitutionally, there is the chance that this could happen. And this is why New York State, along with other states, wanted to put this into their state constitutions. So that way, it can't just be undone by the legislative body. Trump's executive order, which was first reported on by Law Dork's Chris Geidner, formally repealed these protections. Quote, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs within the Department of Labor shall immediately cease promoting diversity, holding federal contractors and subcontractors responsible for affirmative action, and for allowing or encouraging federal contractors and subcontractors to engage in workforce balancing based on race, color, sex, sexual preference, religion, or national origin. Trump's order read, contractors have 90 days until they have to comply. This is a massive regressive attack on basic policy that helps protect people from real discrimination, and it won't lower the price of eggs. Republicans routinely bitch and moan about there not being meritocracy, about how our society needs to be merit based. And yet, as soon as black people, brown people, women, gay people, non binary people, as soon as those folks start showing merit, they want to eliminate them from the conversation. The reason that this was a law in the first place is because government contractors were discriminating. Laws exist for there to be negative consequences when people do something they're not supposed to do. You don't implement a law unless people are doing something. oh my God, DUI laws and DWI laws became laws when people were drinking and driving, became laws after people were getting high and operating motor vehicles. This is how policy making works. There is no other reason to remove these protections other than you just don't like minorities. You only want white people to exist within the federal government. Obviously, we know that Trump is a white nationalist. We know that he is aggressively racist. We know that people within his cabinet and people within his administration are violently racist as well. This is just a way to further appease those people. And it's just really gross and unnecessary because he had black people that voted for him. He had Latinos that voted for him. A huge portion of Latino men voted for Donald Trump. He had gay people vote for him. All of the folks that were in these previously protected classes voted for him. This is not going to help any of those people in a tangible way. It's not going to help them at all. And as the author mentioned, it's not going to lower the cost of living. It's not going to bring down prices on eggs. This move is purely for the white nationalist base. And it's sickening. It's also ridiculous how this was even repealable. How did we go 70, 60 years, damn near 60 years, and all this, and this is able to be undone by one executive order? I don't understand how no one at any point thought to make this more protected. So, yeah, this is going to be absolutely damaging. The destruction of the administrative state is one of Trump's main priorities this time around. He wants the federal government to have as little power as possible when it comes to regulatory apparatuses, when it comes to the social safety net, when it comes to environmental protections, the FDA, the EPA, those agencies, along with Medicare and Social Security, as well as the however many other agencies that he's going to oversee. He wants these to be as feckless and useless as possible because by doing that, he will enrich the oligarchy that he is built around himself. The reduction in efficacy of these agencies will only allow Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, the CEO of ExxonMobil, it will only allow them to accumulate more wealth because they will no longer have to abide by certain regulations. Something that he did in his first term, towards the end of his first term, is he slashed regulations in meatpacking plants. As we saw, there was a listeria outbreak not too long ago. Just overall, a reduction in regulations in the food industry in general, which is why we're seeing more cases of infectious disease going around. He also slashed regulations for companies like Boeing, which is why we're seeing more and more issues cropping up with them. The decimation of the administrative state is going to have incredibly detrimental ramifications for everybody. It doesn't matter who you voted for in this election. You benefit from agencies like Social Security. You benefit from agencies like Medicare. You benefit from the EPA not allowing companies to just pour toxic chemicals into the lake that's behind your house or into the river that runs through your backyard. Donald Trump wants to remove all regulation and he wants unfettered, unencumbered capitalism because everyone who donated money to him, all of the mega wealthy, will benefit from it. We're going to go ahead and we are going to now look at the rest, or not the rest, but some of his further executive orders. This is courtesy of Axios. This isn't every executive order because we'd be here until fucking 2027 with the amount of shit he did to begin his tenure. So, courtesy of Axios. President Trump began his pledge to give America a MAGA takeover Monday, taking a slew of executive actions to walk back Biden era policies and fulfill bold campaign promises. One of the bold campaign promises he has yet to fulfill is ending the war in Ukraine, which he said he would do on day one. And last time I checked, Russia is still bombing the shit out of Ukraine. Really interesting how that seemingly never came to pass because he said he could just call up Vladimir Putin and he would have a deal done immediately. No deal has been compiled, no phone call has been made. The big picture, Trump's radical expansion of executive power will dramatically change life for millions of people if the orders withstand the barrage of legal challenges that are already coming. Shout out to all of the nonprofits. Shout out to all of the folks. Shout out to all the legal scholars, all the lawyers who are tying up these executive orders. You are doing an incredibly necessary thing by stalling the implementation of his agenda. President Trump's executive orders list 2025. It starts here with immigration. Many of Trump's first orders curtail immigration at the southern border. He promised mass deportations, but hasn't detailed how he would implement, staff, and fund such a costly operation. This is a huge failure in messaging from Democrats. Mass deportation polls at 50 or 55%, depending on where you look. And it is because people do not understand that undocumented immigrants would be rounded up, corralled, and placed into concentration camps. There is no other way for you to deport 11 million people without installing a robust network of inhumane camps. That's the only way that that gets done. Additionally, there are ICE raids being carried out all throughout the country. We will get to a story in a little bit where even just the threat of an ICE raid prevented like 75% of workers at a Bakersfield farm from going into work. They're also doing raids in hospitals. It's just really, really like Nazi Germany level stuff going on here. So there's also, he declared an emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border, vowing to deploy troops to the region, including the National Guard. He also instructed the Secretaries of Defense and Homeland Security to construct additional barriers. Trump designated, quote, certain international cartels and organizations such as Aragua, Tren de Aragua, and MS-13 as foreign terrorist organizations and announced plans to invoke Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to target them. This is his path to doing war with Mexico. For whatever reason, he is super horny to drone strike a sovereign country that is our southern neighbor, that is our second or first biggest trading partner. How he got this idea in his head, I don't know. It's probably the rabid racism and the rampant misinformation that the cartels are the reason why fentanyl is pouring into the country. That's not the case. It is because of big pharma. It is because we have it's because we have not decriminalized drugs. It is because, well, it's again tracks back to big pharma, but like 85 to 90% of the fent that comes into the United States comes in through legal ports of entry with citizens born in the United States. If there weren't a black market for drugs, this sector would not exist. Additionally, if there was a more robust system for processing migrants, you wouldn't have the cartels being involved in human trafficking. If someone's abuela from Honduras had a streamlined and more efficient way to come into this country, she would not have to pay thousands of dollars to involve herself in sketchy transportation with the cartel. Moreover, the United States has directly contributed to the quote unquote immigration crisis by destabilizing basically all of Latin America. This is the culmination of 60 years of coups, instilling dictatorships, taking out leaders who didn't align with the United States values. This is a quote unquote problem. I'm saying quote unquote problem because my issue with immigration is that the system is not robust enough to process all of these people as quickly as possible. If you're going to donate all of these resources to securing the southern border, you need to provide these folks with a pathway to citizenship. That's the only way that you can that's the only way to eliminate this conversation. The unfortunate reality is that Democrats nor Republicans are interested on this because they are both far right when it comes to immigration. It's bipartisan at this point, much like foreign policy. Both parties are totally fine with leaving the immigration system as it is. Trump suspended U.S. refugee admissions program resettlements, quote, until such time as the further entry in the United States of refugees aligns with the interest of the United States. Homeland Security will report back within 90 days whether resuming refugee entries would be in the interests of America. Nearly 1,660 Afghans cleared by the U.S. to resettle in the country, including family of active duty U.S. personnel, had their flights canceled following Trump's orders. Trump also ordered Homeland Security to terminate, quote, all categorical parole programs that are contrary to the policies of the United States established in my executive orders, including those for refugees fleeing Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. There was a really interesting moment during Trump's inauguration when he was in the White House signing these executive orders. He was handed one and had no idea what was on it. He is acting purely in the interest of those he has surrounded himself with because he has no interest in helping the working class. He has no morals. He has no agenda. His agenda is whatever the ruling class wants. It is whatever the white nationalists in his administration want. This is why, as you can see, Remain in Mexico is back. Trump reinstated the Remain in Mexico policy, ending a program that released asylum seekers into the U.S. while their cases were considered. Joe Biden implemented this as well, or he utilized this as well during COVID. This is, once again, a very heinous immigration policy because you're making people wait in Mexico as they're processed. This is not an effective system. You need to bolster the judiciary when it comes to reviewing these cases because 99% of migrants coming into this country are not criminals and they are fleeing an unstable situation. There's only like 500,000 criminal migrants out of 11 million, and all of those aren't even violent offenses necessarily. It's an even smaller portion of those people who have committed violent crimes. It's not an issue of deporting violent offenders and people who pose national security threats. They try to frame it as that, but it's not. It's literally just taking Latinos, brown people, and kicking them out of the country. U.S. Customs and Border Protection website said Monday that appointments made through the CBP One app at certain border crossings have been canceled. How hours later, Trump nixed the program. So this was an app developed by the Biden administration that allowed migrants to schedule their appointments online through this app. Again, not enough, but it's something. I think it allowed like 1,500 appointments per day, which this is the type of stuff that needs to be expanded upon. There needs to be more ways for people to apply for whether it's citizenship or TPS, and more people to review these cases. Now, they don't have that. So all of these folks, all of these, these tios and tias and abuelos and all of their, children, people bringing their families here seeking a better life, they could have had an appointment today or tomorrow, and now it's gone. Now they're further living in uncertainty in a foreign country, being Mexico, that they don't necessarily want to be in. They want to come to the United States. They are seeking opportunity. They are seeking the so-called American dream. They want to flee political instability. Of course, it's now ironic that we elected Donald Trump and are the politically unstable nation. But yeah, this is just born out of straight racism and disdain for Latin America. Trump empowered officials to, quote, repeal, repatriate, or remove any alien engaged in the invasion of the southern border. The framing of this and the verbiage of this is crucial because there are certain Trump judges who are saying that if you interpret this as an invasion of our nation, you can begin your path towards undoing birthright citizenship, which is the next thing that we're going to talk about. That is apparently a legal interpretation, even though the Constitution says any person born on American soil is an American citizen. I happen to agree with this. I happen to think that this is not some radical policy because there are other countries across the globe that have similar citizenship laws. One of his boldest moves was an attempt to end birthright citizenship. One of his boldest moves was an attempt to end birthright citizenship for those born to undocumented migrants. Birthright citizenship is protected by the U.S. Constitution, and the order already faces legal challenges. Trump ordered agencies starting 30 days after the order not to recognize babies as citizens if their mothers were unlawfully present at the time of birth and their father was not a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. That also applies to children born to mothers who are unlawful temporary residents and fathers who were not citizens or lawful permanent residents. This is doubly sick because you are punishing a child who has no say in where they are born. Further, this child being born in the United States will likely not know any other country as their home aside from this one. They're going to grow up in an American city, a city in the United States of America, with mostly a large population of folks who have lived the majority of, if not their entire lives, in America. They are going to go to schools in the United States where all of those children, all of their peers, know nothing other than the United States of America. They are going to learn English as their first language, most likely. And if not, they're going to be almost fluent in two languages. They're going to know American TV, music from artists who live in the United States. All these children know is the United States. And Donald Trump does not want them to have the few benefits that come with being born in the United States, whether that be Medicare or Medicaid, whether that be Social Security if you're able to retire, whether that be being able to get a good paying job and be able to earn more than the minimum wage. You don't have to pick strawberries in California for $2 an hour. So his immigration policy, like, it's all sick. Don't misunderstand me. This is all heinous. This is all insidious. This is all going to be massively detrimental to not only the present but also the future of this country. It's going to be indescribably bad if these executive orders are able to get through. But the immigration stuff in particular, That, in my estimation, along with the climate and energy orders, and also with the gutting of the administrative state, are going to have the widest array of impacts, not only on the sheer size of them, not only on the cultural aspects. This is in pertinence to immigration, but it's going to have tremendous impacts on the communities that these folks live in. It's going to have a tremendous economic impact as well, and it's not something that can be so easily undone. If we do have an election in 2028 and some greaseball like Gavin Newsom wins, he can repair the administrative state, and it probably won't take that long. He could also beef up like green energy production, even though by 2028 we will be dangerously close to that 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. But you can't just bring back 11 million people who were deported. So it's twofold. You're wrecking the country now, and you will be wrecking the country in the future because you can't replace all of these people. You can't replace 11 million people. Energy and Environment Executive Orders. Trump declared a national energy emergency, ordering expedited, deregulated drilling as he's repeatedly vowed to drill, baby, drill. One order specifically targets energy production in Alaska, rescinding former President Biden's protections around the state's coastal areas. In a separate memorandum, Trump paused offshore wind leasing in federal waters. Quote, the heads of all other relevant agencies shall not issue new or renewed approvals, rights of way, permits, leases, or loans for onshore or offshore wind projects pending a review of federal wind leasing. We are indescribably fucked. This is the only way that I'm capable of articulating the ramifications of the pro oil, the pro burning fossil fuel agenda. We are so fucked. We are going to expedite climate change considerably because Trump not only wants to drill more oil and be more reliant on fossil fuels, he doesn't want any renewable or sustainable energy in any way, shape, or form. So we can't even balance out the fossil fuel production. No wind, no solar, no nuclear energy, no geothermal energy. What's worse, what sucks about this as well is that all of this oil isn't even oil that we own. The United States has shelled out its natural resources to private corporations in the name of capitalism. The United States produces more oil than any other country, 19 million barrels a day. And what do we get out of it? Nothing. The the energy companies extort us for a product that comes from our reserves, right? ExxonMobil drills all this oil, and then it could cost like, I don't know, $1.50, $2 a barrel. They sell it back to us, at least in New York, around $3 a gallon. In a developed country like Norway or Mexico, the government owns the oil and gas. So that way, the profit motive is removed from the equation. If it takes $1 to harvest 1 gallon of gas, the federally owned oil company will sell it back to you at a slight markup of like $1.05 or $1.10, just so they can make their money back. Additionally, if they do decide to charge a little bit more, like if they do like $1.15, that can fund infrastructure, that can fund social welfare programs. This is what Norway does. Norway has huge oil and gas reserves, and they use this to fund a very robust welfare state. But instead, we don't get that. The energy sector, if it is going to exist in whatever form it exists, whether it is green energy or oil and gas, it needs to be nationalized. That is the only way that we would see any benefit from it. The folks in Alaska, believe it or not, do get a stipend from the oil and gas companies. When they drill up there, the residents all get a kickback from it. So that would be something that would have a tangible impact on you as a working class person. You get money put into your pocket for doing nothing, because this is this is the oil companies don't they're not born with the immutable right of gas ownership. They own it because they have the money to build oil rigs and harvest it, but it's a natural resource. It belongs to the people that live here. Paris Climate Paris Climate Treaty, state of play. He also signed an order withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement. It is worth noting that we are the second largest greenhouse gas emitter, and I believe the largest per capita. I think the three largest in terms of volume are in this order: China, India, and the U.S. But the U.S. is first in per capita, I'm fairly certain. Trump had pulled out of the pact during his first term, but Biden rejoined the deal in a day one order of his own. It takes a year to withdraw from the agreement. Trump also took aim at the Biden administration's federal procurement targets for clean power, electric vehicles, and other energy goals. Trump directed the energy sector to restart application reviews for liquefied natural gas export projects, which were paused by Biden over climate change concerns. Trump also revoked a 2021 Biden executive order that set a goal for 50% of U.S. vehicle sales to be electric by 2030. Keep in mind, these aren't even radical radical proposals that Biden had in place. It doesn't matter if 50% of US vehicles are electric by 2030 if companies like Amazon, UPS, and FedEx don't have entirely electric fleets. This is what people don't understand. Climate change is not an individual issue, but it has been presented as such because we live in an individualistic, alienated society. My my impacts on climate change are negligible compared to companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft. I think like what is it? 100 companies are responsible for nearly all of the emissions that cause climate change. It is big business. It is industrialized society that has put us in this position. If you want to have big business, that's fine. But big business is who needs to be targeted in your climate change efforts. We could do as much solar as we want. I know New York State has a very robust solar program. We have wind farms all across Long Island on the South Shore, which I've seen, and that's great. But there needs to be more robust action on the federal level. There needs to be more incentive for people to have cleaner energy alternatives, but those same alternatives need to be imposed on corporations. Corporations do not have rights. It is the government's responsibility to tell corporations how to behave when what they are doing is detrimental to the people who live here. Climate change is an existential threat largely brought on by corporations. And this is all going to be exacerbated under Trump's second term. Executive orders targeting DEI and transgender Americans. Trump established Monday that, quote, it is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female, on official documents. This is a quote, these sexes are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible reality, the executive order read. Transgender Americans were a central target of Trump's often hyperbolic and outright false campaign trail messaging. Zoom out. He also rescinded a Biden administration provision that allowed trans people to serve in the military. Trump did not immediately ban trans military personnel from serving as he did under his first administration, but he paved the path to revive the ban. Before we get any farther here, the example of this, like one example of this is on your passport, you will only be able to select two sexes, male and female, but they have to be the sex that you were assigned at birth. Not only that, this is coming shortly after the House of Representatives passed a bill that would ban trans girls from participating in female sports in public schools in grades K through 12. The idea that trans people are to blame for all of your ills is not true. The one trans person that you have encountered in your life is not the reason that you're working for $7.25 in Missouri or in Arkansas, whatever fucking state has that minimum wage. They're not the reason why you're not able to take time off from work to go see your family. They're not the reason why you can't get a free higher education. You shouldn't like the hyperfixation on trans people is to distract from the fact that Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk were sat front row at Trump's inauguration. Who do you think is more of a threat to your well-being? A trans person or Mark Zuckerberg? This also didn't the anti-trans messaging also did not play well in the midterms. It was a huge reason why there wasn't a red wave as so many people expected. It's because people largely do not care. What you do in your private life, that's up to you. Some folks may not be pro trans or anti trans. They may not understand it, but it doesn't matter to them because you do not have an impact on their life. It's the same thing we saw with all of the panic around gay people back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Whatever you do in your private life is up to you. It has no bearing on my life. As long as you're a nice, respectful person, cool. As long as you can live a happy, fulfilling life in whatever way, shape, or form you would like, that's fine. The majority of people do not become rabid at the sight of a trans person. It's really only folks in government and like religious freaks and super far right freaks who openly care about this stuff, who want to quite actually exterminate these people. Trump, as part of his crusade against what the GOP decrees as woke culture, ordered the dismantling of government diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within 60 days. It eliminates policies that establish several diversity initiative, Axios' Emily Peck reports, including one that widens sexual discrimination protections to include sexual orientation and gender identity. In a Tuesday order, Trump specifically directed the FAA to, quote, immediately return to non-discriminatory merit-based hiring as required by law. What what people don't understand in this argument is that diversity initiatives and things like affirmative action, who by the way, the class of people that benefited most from affirmative action was white women, they don't exist to just hand out jobs to black people, brown people, women, gay people. They exist to allow these applicants to have their applications viewed. If you take two people, one black, one white, and they have all of the same qualifications that you're looking for, they all came from the same school, they both went to Duke, they both scored exceptionally well, like 3.5 GPA or a 3.8 GPA. Affirmative action or DEI does not automatically give the job to the black person, but it puts the black person's application in view of the hiring manager. Without these programs, these applications have the potential to be thrown out just because they may have a non-white name or a name that isn't typically associated with white people, right? Or they'll come from an HBCU and they'll automatically be discriminated against because of that. It's to give them the opportunity to be hired. In a separate order, Trump ordered all executive departments and agencies to terminate what he called, quote, discriminatory and illegal preferences, policies, programs, guidance, and other provisions, and to, quote, combat illegal private sector DEI preferences, mandates, policies, programs, and activities. In doing so, he revoked decades of executive orders, including the executive order we talked about in the beginning, signed in 1965 by LBJ. It also calls for each agency to identify, quote, up to 9 potential civil compliance investigations of publicly traded corporations, large nonprofits or large nonprofits, foundations with assets of 500 million or more, state and local bar and medical associations, and what the fuck? So this guy's just he's auditing all of these large entities on the basis of DEI. Other executive orders affecting federal workers. Trump signed several other provisions that will impact government workers. He required a full time return to in office work for federal employees and ordered a hiring freeze on government positions. The hiring freeze does not, oh, of course, it doesn't apply to the military or immigration enforcement, national security, or public safety. So if the state is able to commit violence onto you, you can be hired. But if you work at the EPA or you work at the FTC or you work at, whatever private agency, you have to move back to Washington, D.C. And I was watching a video from Sam Cedar this morning, and he pointed out that this is another way for Trump to dissuade people from wanting to work in government. If you have to work in Washington, D.C., that may not be feasible for you. If you were previously working remote in LA or Boston or New York, are you going to uproot your life to go to Washington, D.C.? Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But it's a financial issue as well. You may not be able to afford rent in Washington, D.C. If you have children, you won't be able to so easily take them out of whatever situation, get them resituated with school, finding an apartment that could fit all of these people. It's also another way to funnel private workers into working for private corporations, which in turn drives down the money that they can offer you at a government position. Because you're probably not working in government for the money. You're likely working in government because you want to make a difference in some way, or you really believe strongly in environmental regulations. But if that's a pain in the ass, are you going to jump through all of those additional hoops to land this job? Some people will, but it's just another barrier of entry. It's like psychologically proven that if you present someone with multiple steps that they have to jump through to get something, they may or may not be interested in going through all of those hoops. He also reinstated his first term Schedule F executive order, which could make it easier to file civil servants deemed disloyal. The order could strip employment protections from thousands of federal employees. Employees are, quote, not required to personally or politically support the current president, but they must faithfully implement the administration's policies to the best of their ability, which basically means that even if you don't support the candidate, you are now, and you're going to work at the behest of this candidate, and you're going to do whatever this candidate says. You are basically working in a corporation at this point where your boss tells you what to do, and you're going to do it because they view you as a dog. If you're able to be fired just because you disagree with the president on a certain thing, that is not a precedent you want to set, because there are hyper specific things that the president doesn't know about that people in these jobs do. So this is one thing that they talked about with Project 2025, and it's surrounding Donald Trump with as many sycophants as possible. In fact, one of the major keys of Project 2025 is replacing all civil servants with Trump loyalists. So that way you have just a string of yes people who will do whatever you say. That is ultimately Trump's goal. He wants to be a dictator. He wants this to be a monarchy. He said in his inauguration that he was appointed by God. It was divine intervention that led to him being the president of the United States for the second time. That is monarchy talk. That is what kings say. That is how kings are put into power because they were deemed this by God. January 6th part is this was a hugely controversial thing. In fact, on the night of the inauguration, that was basically all the mainstream media talked about was January 6th. And well, yes, I understand that January 6th is a crucial moment in our history. This guy staged an insurrection. He attempted to coup the government of the United States. He should be in prison for it, and he's not. While it is a huge story, we're 4 years removed from it. There are other things that Trump is trying to do now that are just as, if not worse, than January 6th. Anyway, Trump pardoned the vast majority of January 6th defendants charged with participating in the Capitol riot and commuted the sentences of 14 others. Among among those were leaders of the extremist group like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. Quote, these are hostages, approximately 1,500 for a pardon, full pardon, Trump said. Pardoning rioters was a prominent campaign pledge, but Trump had previously said recipients would be determined on a case by case basis. He also announced Tuesday that he had signed a full and unconditional pardon for Ross Ulbricht, the creator of the unlawful Silk Road Marketplace, who was sentenced to life in prison in 2015. So he pardoned a drug lord, a drug kingpin, as he's going after the cartels in Mexico as terrorists. Ross Ulbricht is a terrorist. And he's probably going to get a job with some pharmaceutical company. Back to January 6th, Enrique Tarrio was pardoned as well. He was one of the masterminds behind this riot. He was sentenced to like 20 years in prison for conspiracy charges. He had whole notebooks and detailed plans about how exactly he was going to help overthrow the government for Donald Trump. This was a point of contention, and I say contention, I don't really know how contentious it was between JD Vance and Donald Trump, because Trump mentioned repeatedly full pardons for all of these guys, but JD Vance said that violent offenders should not be pardoned, and I would agree. There's a difference between you being at the Capitol on January 6th, expressing your First Amendment right. I understand that. You are allowed to organize and protest in whatever manner you like. There's a difference between those people and those who were actively inside the halls of Congress looking to hang Mike Pence and kill AOC. Those people need to be in prison for however long. I don't know. I'm not a judge. I'm not a lawyer. But there needs to be consequences for actions. This is what Trump does not understand. When you do something wrong, when you break the law, you need to go to prison for an amount of time that is appropriate for the charge you have committed. Trespassing may not deserve 4 years in prison, but assaulting a police officer might. That's the thing. But he doesn't understand that because he got away with 91 crimes. So he thinks, and again, he also thinks that because these are his ride or die. These are the kings and queens of these are the champions of the dick sucking Olympics. So he's going to do whatever they want. But the 70 million people who voted for him because they thought that he would lower the cost of goods, they get fucking hung out to dry. So I'm not necessarily surprised by this. I am surprised that the violent offenders are pardoned, but even then, there's been so many contradictions with Trump and his executive orders and what he says literally the day after. So we'll talk about tariffs in a little bit, but just to preview it, there was a time where he said like 60% tariffs across the board. On Inauguration Day, he promised 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Now, he's going to have people look into the situation. This guy operates exclusively on vibes. This is what makes him so unstable as a politician. And this is what makes him such a threat to not only the country, but the world. Because he acts on whatever his latest impulse is. There is no justification behind any of these signings, orders, nothing. If there were, he would pardon everyone on January 6th. And then he would come out and say, yes, I pardoned all of them because I believe they are innocent. You wouldn't walk it back and say, well, I actually think that this is a case by case basis. Health executive orders. the WHO, COVID, and drug costs. Trump signed an order pulling the U.S. from the World Health Organization, a process he started during his first term. Monday's order said the U.S. will withdraw, quote, due to the organization's mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Dog. It is 2025. Nobody gives a fuck about COVID anymore. No one cares. This is not a talking point. No one cares. And it continues, and other global health crises, its failure to adopt urgently needed reforms, and its inability to demonstrate independence from the inappropriate political influence of WHO member states. Really interesting, because who probably has the most political influence in the World Health Organization? It's probably the United States, as like the third fucking most populated country on the planet that's not China or India, who China at least does not align with Western values, so they don't have any influence on the United States. This is just so dumb. This is so stupid. Like polio is gonna come back, and someone in Congress is gonna contract polio. Like this is who is this for? I need to understand. Who is this for? Is this just because you still have a hate boner for Anthony Fauci? This doesn't do anything, right? You're taking time with this executive order to just like put on a show. Zoom out. Trump also rescinded a 2020 Biden order to lower the cost of prescription drugs. That's interesting because this deserves more of a bullet. I actually think I added this into my list of topics. Yes, I did. So we will get to that later on. I'm not going to go too far into it. TikTok extension, Doge, and other executive orders. This is the end of the article. By the way, Trump signed a number of other executive orders and actions. Those include, quote, bullet, ensuring government agencies do not, quote, unconstitutionally abridge the free speech of any American, highlighting what Trump and his allies considered censorship under Biden. So, what do you say, President Trump, about pro-Palestinian protesters? Are you going to be okay if the government agencies do not abridge their free speech? That's interesting. It is, because he doesn't give a fuck about that. Like, you're still going to be allowed to be arrested if you're protesting for Palestinian liberation. Like, this is, again, just performative. It's not logical. There's no basis here. They don't believe in free speech. They don't. This is why Mark Zuckerberg took down his moderation policies. This is why Elon doesn't have really any moderation on Twitter. It's because whenever the right talks about quote unquote free speech, they just want the ability to lie and not be corrected, which is not free speech, right? You can't just say things and then be mad when someone has a counter to it, right? This is what they call the discourse, that is discourse, but that's what they talk about when they consider the marketplace of ideas, right? Whoever has the better idea is going to win. But whenever they're presented with the truth to an idea, they're like, actually, I don't like that. Meta took away content moderation because conservative accounts were flagged more times for misinformation than left wing accounts. But there's a reason for that. It's because conservatives lie straight up. Their policies are unpopular. Conservative policy has and always will be unpopular among the majority of Americans because they do not like and are not in favor of things that would benefit the majority of Americans. They don't believe that the minimum wage should be raised. There was the Treasury Secretary was asked this point blank by Bernie Sanders, and he said, "I think the minimum wage is open. I think the minimum wage is fine." He did not think that that should be raised. They do not want free education available to everybody so they can go on to a university and get a high-paying job in STEM or, in whatever the fuck they want. Their policies are unpopular, so they have to lie to get votes. Trump's entire campaign was vapid. It was vagueness. It was nothing. It was trans people and Mexicans are the reason why your life sucks, not the fact that major corporations outsourced your job overseas to South Asia and to China. Ordering a review of trade policies and agreements, that's whatever. That's more so I think about the tariff stuff. Well, I think just in general, but he's not gonna do anything with NAFTA, which is a fucking disaster. Nothing is gonna come of this revoking security clearances of Trump's former national security advisor John Bolton and former intelligence officials who signed a letter discrediting the Hunter Biden laptop story, which turned out to be a dud, by the way. It was just pictures of his cock. That's all it was. And Republicans are mad that this was not a bigger deal. Something that isn't mentioned with security clearances. Trump is going to give security clearances to pretty much everybody in his administration without doing proper vetting. Very cool to have the dumbest people alive with access to highly classified documents. This is also the formal establishment of Doge, which is going to be a disaster for the administrative state because they want to cut funding, but also don't want to cut it from the Department of Defense, which is the most bloated agency in the U.S. government and also hasn't passed an audit in 7 years. Probably will be 8 years after this one. Suspending the TikTok ban for 75 days. I talked about that in a previous episode. Declaring that federal buildings should respect regional, traditional, and classical architectural heritage to beautify public spaces and ennoble the United States. I think that means that I don't even know what the fuck this means. President Trump wants to make federal buildings adhere to traditional design styles, reigniting his beef with DC's architecture. What? This is fucking stupid. Does he not like traditional? Like, this is just Greek. Dude, literally, all of the fucking political buildings in Washington, D.C. are taken from Greek architecture. Okay, I gotta get back to the bottom of the page here. That was funny. Renaming Mount Denali or renaming Denali to Mount McKinley and the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. William McKinley has no tie to Denali in any way. It was purely performative that this was named after him. It was just, I guess, out of respect for this guy. And the Gulf of America thing is fucking actually the dumbest thing ever. Like, how does this make your rent more affordable? It doesn't.